3, 2, 1. This hangout on air is live. I have to read that every time to remind myself that there's certain things I can't say in front of the camera. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. It is the Audible Live each and every Thursday night right here on our YouTube channel, footballguys.com podcast, and the Thursday night halftime show that you need to mark on your calendars. And not quite a blowout. Still have a game left tonight in the Colts and the Titans right now. We'll keep abreast of that situation. Also talk plenty of fantasy football. Sigmund Bloom, Matt Waldman, Dr. Dean Bremmel. Boom, babe, what's up?
Was that a mic? Is it my cue?
Boom, baby, what's up?
Cue. I'm sorry, I didn't catch that because of a little hiccup there. What's up is this is a somewhat competitive game. We're seeing some fight from the Texans, but really what we're seeing is we were wondering at some point it was going to become Andrew Luck's world. We're all just living in it, and that's what it's looking like, especially T.Y. Hilton, who's teleporting around the Houston secondary. And this Houston defense has looked imposing at times, but Andrew Luck is making them look powerless to stop him.
Powerless to stop the Jedi that is Master Obi Waldman. Obi Waldman, what's up tonight, man?
Not too much. Just watching some David Cobb from Minnesota, so I'm feeling a little bit of a chill, so I got my hoodie on.
And he's ready for action. He's Dr. Gene Brammel. Dr. Gene, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. Free J.J. Watt. Actually, the Texans kind of came back a little bit, so we'll take it.
I'll say free Todd Gurley. We'll talk about that later. The Rookie Scouting Portfolio show. Let's jump into this game action tonight. Bloom broke it down. But before we do that, we have to check in on the injury situation with Dr. Gene Brammel and take you around the National Football League, kind of get you up to date on everything that's going on. First off, we had Andre Johnson active in this one. So Dr. Gene, in kind of a awkward segue, we're talking about this game tonight, but Andre Johnson, were you surprised that he didn't practice all week yet he is in there tonight?
No, I don't think so. I think we have to remember it's a Thursday night game. Andre Johnson probably would not have practiced Wednesday, may have only been limited on Thursday had he been preparing for a Sunday game. So I don't think it's any surprise there. They've been managing his reps earlier in the week with this ankle injury and even through some hamstring stuff he had earlier in the year. I'm impressed with how well he looked on a couple of those bubble screens and his touchdown pass. I think he looks pretty good.
We have a Monday night situation with more than one player, but first one comes to mind is Zach Stacy. And even though he didn't practice today, there have been reassurances that he will play. It is a calf injury. Should we trust those reassurances? And what should we look for? Should we require a full practice if we're going to leave him in our lineup Sunday morning? If we get a limited practice, is that enough? Regardless, of course, that's not a word. Regardless, of course, of what we think of the matchup with San Francisco and things like that, just about Stacy's status Monday night.
I wouldn't trust anything that comes out in the early week from Jeff Fisher. He's not as notorious as Jim Schwartz or Marvin Lewis or some other coaches have been with injury situations early in the week, but Jeff Fisher really isn't going to give us much either. It's not surprising that Zach Stacy is not practicing much in the early week. I think it was a really good sign when they came out on Monday, and Jeff Fisher, again, doesn't really talk much about injuries, was as optimistic as he was about Zach Stacy. But anytime you've got a lower leg muscle strain, calf in particular, but quads, hamstrings, whatever it may be, with a running back, there's a concern. So limited practice tomorrow. I think you'd feel good if he had a full practice by Friday or Saturday morning. But as long as he's increasing his practice participation, talking to the media, I think that's a good sign. Concern for me would be not so much, the injury is definitely a concern, but I also think that Benny Cunningham's increased usage with or without Zach Stacy in the lineup is something that we have to think about. So, this just could be another way for Cunningham's usage to increase. We might see Zach Stacy's number of touches decrease. Watch his practice participation Friday and Saturday in particular, and we'll see where we go from there.
So, Gene, how neurotic are you about A.J. Green's toe?
I am 74% neurotic. That's neurotic. According to 5 Labs or whatever that is on Facebook. We're having fun determining exactly how agreeable, neurotic, and extroverted we all are, and how much percentage we are. So I'm 74% neurotic about everything. I don't know how you come up with that number. I think that right there is enough to sink whatever 5 Labs has going on, because I'm not 74% neurotic about anything.
That's
But
exactly
AJ
what someone who's 74% neurotic would say, by the
No.
way.
Denial.
72.
It's-
That's well, yeah. It's, give me the denial percentage, and then mix and match that up with the neurotic, and we'll see how that goes. Keep psychoanalyzing me, folks. So y'all got me going already.
It's the tendency to experience unpleasant emotions easily, such as anger. You seem a little angry right now, Gene.
Now, let me wait here. Take a small little drink here. I don't have any Xanax, Bloom. I gave it all to you.
Any nervous tics?
I need it.
You have to
he
watch
drinking?
me closely. I don't know. It's just water, I think. It's a little bit old, so who knows what might be in there by now. AJ Green. AJ Green is interesting because...
You worried about germs?
Nah. I'm a pediatrician, man. I've got an iron immune system. I probably shouldn't have said that. I'm sure to get sick tomorrow. You guys are going to see me with tissue stuffed up my nose this time next week. All right, can we talk about AJ Green or what? I mean, there's reason to be concerned about AJ Green. There's reasons to be neurotic about this, simply because I don't think anybody really has a good handle on what's going on, and we know this is something that Green has been fighting for 4 or 5 weeks at a time now, and it's been aggravated multiple times. So I would not put much stock in when Marvin Lewis says this is a little bit more than turf toe. I would not read that to mean that it's worse than turf toe. It may be that it's a worse toe injury, but don't read that because everybody's we're worried about with LaShawn McCoy and other players in the past. Turf toe can be a devastating situation for a player and linger all season long. This particular toe injury could as well, but I think the more than turf toe simply means, and this is what Will Carroll has said, and we're kind of hearing often, it's probably just a little bit more than the big toe. It might not be the only toe that's involved as the big toe. And since turf toe specifically means big toe, when Marvin Lewis says a little bit more than big toe, I think it just means it's a little bit larger area of the foot than just that particular ligament of the toe. And no, I don't think that means Liz Frank, as Pro Football Talk kind of speculated Mike Florio speculated 2 or 3 weeks ago. I don't think that's what's going on. Jeff Hobson, very good beat writer for Bengals.com, sometimes spreads a little bit of information for the team, sometimes has some good stuff that's pretty specific, says it has to do with the ligaments that are around the sesamoid bones, which is a little bit further back in the foot. Basically, throw all those details out. Know that AJ Green's got an injury near his big toe, that it's been aggravated twice, that he's seen a couple of foot specialists, that he doesn't need surgery, but at this point I think it's fair to say he's got an open-ended return-to-play timetable. So I don't see any way he plays this week, and I think week 7 is probably up in the air as well. Could this stretch into a 3 to 4 week injury or beyond? Yes, it could. I don't have any source or anything specific in what's been reported that suggests that the case, but I would work from a 1 to 2 week plus at this standpoint, and then I would expect him to be reevaluated next week. The difficulty with this is AJ Green said a couple of weeks ago that he absolutely was not going to sit out before the bye week if he thought he was okay to go. And then we saw him play last week, and I didn't really see any limitation in how he played. So it's definitely disappointing that they're past their bye week, that he doesn't have, if he's going to rest it, it's going to cost him game time at this point. It's not a good sign that it's been aggravated a couple of times, and it's really not a good sign either that it was aggravated in a warm-up portion of practice, even before they were out there taking team drills and individual reps. It was something that he was frustrated with just after warming up. So makes you think that it probably wasn't right after the game last week. So let's say that Green is probably going to be out on the order of 1 to 2 weeks, and hope that that's all that it is.
From one superstar wide receiver to another, with Dr. Gene Bramall here on the Audible Live each and every Thursday night. We got to talk about Calvin Johnson now and the high ankle sprain. Looks like he's not going to go this week. To that I say, Dr. Gene, good, and I toast you some milk.
Yeah, I think that's the case too. The theme of my Wednesday article this week was NFL players and elite athletes in general are so competitive and are so willing to try to play through injuries that we will see these guys, and we saw it with Roddy White, C.J. Spiller, any number of players over time, try to play through injuries that are just really too difficult to play through. And call them a decoy if you want. It's just clear that guys like Calvin Johnson and probably Brandon Marshall now early in the season just weren't healthy enough to be able to do anything as they normally would, but call them stubborn, call them competitive, whatever you like. And I'm not knocking these guys for doing it. It's just a fact of life in the NFL. Just aren't really able to get through those things. And I think Calvin Johnson had it hammered home that, yes, Folks are going to dive at his legs to make tackles because they know that that's going to be the easiest place to bring him down right now, is the weak link in his armor, so to speak. And if that's going to happen and he's not able to get up after just a single tackle, that was the only target he had last week, then it doesn't make a lot of sense to continue to go out there, get 1, 2, or 3 targets a week and not really be able to help your team that much anyway, and put yourself at risk of having a setback that costs you another couple of weeks. So all signs, and I don't know if Calvin has said it himself at this point, but there's really no way he plays in week 6. Now that we know it's a high ankle sprain, and we kind of, with both Brandon Marshall and Calvin Johnson and probably Marvin Jones at this point, the longer these guys stay out with ankle injuries, it just makes you think high ankle sprain. Now that we know that that's what it is, and it's been aggravated a couple of times, it just makes sense for him to miss a couple of weeks. Is he going to miss week 7? I don't know. It's another situation where they'll give him a week to 10 days of rest. They'll reevaluate him next Tuesday, see how he feels, and possibly let him practice Wednesday or Thursday. But until we see him take pretty close to a full practice by the end of the week, I don't think we can even trust him if he says he thinks he's good to go, because we kind of heard that last week, and all of the beat writer reports leading in from pregame warm-ups leading into that week 5 game were very reassuring. So until we see him get through consecutive practices well or take a full practice, then I would expect to leave him on your bench.
Gene, people out there that picked up Brandon Oliver should be on the edge of their seats for what they get this weekend against Oakland. However, Ryan Matthews has yet to resume running after suffering a right MCL sprain on September 14th. So we're talking about almost a month. San Diego's bye week is week 10. I mean, is it possible that we don't see Matthews until week 11? What's the timetable now adjusted for this idea that he's not even running yet?
Well, we knew it was a mid-grade injury, and there's grades of mid-grade, so maybe it was a pretty severe mid-grade injury. Nothing, these MCL sprains are nothing that require surgery unless it's a really bad situation. But we were always kind of given that 4 to 6 week time frame, and so I don't think it's a surprise that he's not been cleared to run yet. They want to let that ligament completely heal and have his joint be stable so that when he starts conditioning again, he doesn't suffer some other soft tissue injury, a muscle strain, or something along those lines, and a cascade effect because he's not running comfortably as he normally would. So no, I'm not too surprised. No, I don't think I wouldn't handicap and say he's most likely to come back after the bye at this point. We've got a couple of weeks for him to get back to practice. Kind of sounds like we heard Kevin Acey say earlier this week that it was going to be another 1 to 2 weeks before he come back. We may hear that he's running before the end of the week, and I think depending on how that goes, it's not necessarily the same situation as with a muscle strain to where you'll see a guy, we've seen it with Jordan Reed, probably going to see it with Cecil Shorts, where a player takes a week to recondition, gets some limited practices in, and then goes through the next week of practice as a true game prep. We may not see that with Matthews. Matthews may only need to run a little bit, get back in condition 1 week, and they may let him get back on the field. Some of that may have to do with how well Brandon Oliver plays in the meantime, but no, I don't think the fact that he's not running 2 or 3 weeks after the injury means that this could all of a sudden turn into a 6 to 8 week situation. MCL, probably worst case scenario, knowing that it doesn't need surgery, is a 4 to 6 week deal.
Mute button.
Matt.
Oh, excuse me. I had a case of the Brambles, so let me go ahead and. Gene, actually,
good luck with that.
Yeah, right. So tell me from your vantage point here in the psychiatrist's office, what is it that you picture when you say the word cascade? Is it possibly Keenan Allen? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
I pictured dishwasher detergent. No, but that's a good point. I think Keenan Allen is probably our first player this year where you can really strongly argue that his second muscle strain is a cascade situation. So what I mean by cascade is a player who is consciously or subconsciously compensating for an injury that they have. So in Allen's case, he's got a groin injury. His gait may be a little bit different. He may not be willing to run in quite the same way. Maybe he thinks he's 95 or 98% back, but his gait is still off a little bit. The way in which you change how your body moves can predispose another muscle to be injured because it's being used in a different way than it usually is. It's no different than us old guys, if we do something different, when we go back out in Vegas and we play some 3-on-3 and we're sore the next day, it's very similar to that. You're using muscles in a different way than you would otherwise. The reassuring thing about Keenan Allen is that the groin injury that he had before, although it seemed like it lingered for a couple of weeks, it really didn't seem like it affected him on the field, and it didn't bother him all that much to not get through a full week of practice. Hopefully we'll see the same thing with the quad, but there's now two things going on. I don't think it's unlikely that Keenan Allen's groin injury has completely healed. So he's got a groin muscle that probably isn't quite right. Now he's got a quad muscle that isn't quite right. Whether it's on the same side of the body or not doesn't matter in this case, but he's got two muscles that aren't right. So he's at even a higher risk setup for an aggravation of one of those muscle strains at this point, or yet a third cascade type injury. So I would like to see him back on the practice field Friday before I would recommend him this weekend. But given what we've seen from him in the past, they've been kind of cautious with what look like pretty low-grade injuries, and we'll hope that that's what the case is with this particular quad injury for this week.
It's the Audible Live each and every Thursday night right here at youtube.com/footballguys, DOTCOM, that's .com as well, as we take you inside the injury report with Dr. Gene Bramwell. A couple more rounds here, Gene, because there's so much to get to. We talked about it after the waiver wire show. It's like there's just so many transactions you have to look forward to. There's so many injuries this season, and that's why we love to chat about it. As always, brought to you by FanDuel.com, where every week is a new season. That's FanDuel.com. They're handing out over $10 million in prizes weekly, so make sure you check them out, FanDuel.com. It's FanDuel.com. Dr. Gene, you're quirky. No Sean Moreno. I would not describe you similarly to No Sean Moreno, but Moreno now quirky. It'll be about 8 years before I come back. No, actually he's out there now and working with that brace. Talked to Adam Schefter yesterday. Said, well, it comes down to basically how they're going to work with this brace. Can he play with this brace to cover up that elbow injury? Your thoughts on Moreno and getting back a little bit quicker than, well, he was teasing us with?
Yeah, and I think that was interesting last week when he said what he said and the beat writers, and then on second thought, I thought, you know what, and quirky, that was the way they described him a lot. He was quirky in Denver, maybe he's just kind of joking around with us, and then they saw him back on the practice field on Monday and Tuesday, and that seemed to be the case. But the brace is the primary issue. So yes, the brace is going to help him come back a little bit more quickly, but he didn't, and maybe this was him just being quirky again and tweaking the media in the locker room today after practice. But he was not positive at all and didn't seem to be optimistic about how he felt with that brace. And if it affects how he carries the ball, if it gets in his head about, am I going to be able to switch hands, switch arms with the ball when I need to, when I go to one side of the field, or, when I've got a defender coming up on one side and I want to protect the ball, am I going to be able to receive the ball from the quarterback correctly? Am I going to be able to block? Will I be able to extend my arms to catch? This hinged brace, what they'll do with that brace is they'll kind of lock that elbow so that it won't be able to fully extend. And if it needs to be hinged in such a way that he's not comfortable with it, then it won't surprise me if he decides, you know what, I don't know that I want to practice on Friday and I may not play this week. But based on what we heard earlier in the week, I think we're likely to see Moreno play. I think it's more likely that he was just talking out loud in the locker room today more than anything else. But if you see his practice participation slip on Friday, then that's something I'd be concerned about. And Lamar Miller's been playing well enough that it would be kind of a long shot for Noshawn Moreno to come back, as Arian Foster did last week, from his injury and get a lot more carries than we expect him to get. So this might be a situation where you want to wait and see what Moreno does with the brace on, see what the split and carries between Moreno and Lamar Miller are before you fully trust him in your lineup. Maybe see him as a flex play only, and then be willing to change your mind if you get a much more rosy picture from Moreno tomorrow. Maybe they've adjusted his brace in such a way that he feels comfortable, or that second day of practice he decides he's going to be okay after all.
Gene, it seemed like the football world kind of woke up this week to what you've been saying for a while, which is that this Carson Palmer situation has a fuzzy, indefinite endpoint. However, there also is a bit of a perception that he's just this close from coming down. The nerve woke up, and he's been tossing the ball around. Should we believe, and I don't know if it's optimism because it's colored with the pessimism of what your realism should have clued people into right away.
Yeah, it may be that the nerve is firing again, but it's been 3 to 4 weeks of those muscles really not getting much stimulation. And there's not a whole lot of compensatory muscles around that top part of the shoulder, the deltoid muscle. Maybe he can overcome the loss of strength in that muscle with, the tricep and the trap and a few other muscles around that area. But just because the nerve has started to fire doesn't mean that that muscle is all the way back to its former strength yet, and that's going to affect his ability to throw consecutive practices and consecutive throws downfield and accuracy and all of those things. What has me concerned is that, yes, there's always, with him feeling better and able to throw again, there's a chance that he'll play this week. But he was talking on Tuesday, Wednesday about going back out to Denver to see this nerve specialist again to continue to get treatment. On Friday, I don't know why you would leave practice on Friday and get more treatment after just having a couple of limited practices on Wednesday and Thursday and then be expected to play. Logan Thomas was taking first-team reps today. Carson Palmer wasn't doing that. He's not going to be with the team tomorrow. He's going out to Denver. I really think Week 7 is the most optimistic timetable for him. He still has yet to prove that he can throw a number of passes downfield with strength and accuracy on consecutive days. I don't think he's done that on Wednesday and Thursday. They talked about him throwing 40 to 50 passes on Wednesday. The pictures that we saw from some of the beat writers show him in a helmet and pads and just lightly tossing, it looked like to me, to not even a wide receiver. I think that was another quarterback, was the image that I saw, just 10 to 15 yards away. And yes, he was back doing some limited work today, but I don't think there's been enough yet for him to be reasonably expected to go this weekend. The wrench in the works here is that Drew Stanton has not yet been cleared for a full practice. So, and we may not know about that until tomorrow. Teams don't usually send their players to an independent neurologist to be cleared for game action until Friday after practice and sometimes Saturday. So the fact that Drew Stanton was not taking first-team reps today doesn't tell you all that much because it may have been a padded practice they hadn't cleared him for. But if he's not able to go and Carson Palmer is close, do you want a 90% Carson Palmer who may not be able to throw 50-yard passes downfield to Michael Floyd but might be able to do almost everything else, or Logan Thomas? So we may see Carson Palmer back in the same way that we saw Alshon Jeffrey or Brandon Marshall or A.J. Green, guys that we know are not fully right, just because of the situation at hand. So I'm not writing off Carson Palmer entirely for Week 6, but I think reading the tea leaves here, Week 7 is probably the earliest that we can expect Carson Palmer to look like the Carson Palmer of Week 1.
Man, I listen to Gene sit here and talk about Carson Palmer and the nerve firing, and I picture this old Star Trek episode with Sigmund Bloom as James T. Kirk, and we could have Gene over here as the doc, and then we could like flash over to like a set made up of Kean Fahey down in the engine room, which is the nerve center, and we could have him giving the classic Scotty. But let's go ahead and talk about. Go ahead. Go ahead. What were you going to say, Bloom?
See, you messed up all my comic timing. Forget it. Forget about it.
I can hear Kean now. I'm Irish.
Yep, exactly. But see, that's the whole joke is he gets somebody on Twitter who at least once a week who basically misidentifies where his country of origin. But speaking of USC athletes, let's talk about Reggie Bush's ankle and whether or not he's going to be ready to go.
I don't know if he's going to be ready to go or not. Reggie Bush in the past has really not been right if he's not been able to get back to practice relatively early in the week. And he's not practiced Wednesday, he's not practiced Thursday. Yes, he could get back on the practice field Friday. But there really wasn't enough that I saw. I mean, you kind of make a case that it was a high ankle sprain, kind of make a case that it was a bone bruise. The mechanism wasn't perfect on video, and we got a pretty good look at it. Just wasn't clear enough to say this is the most likely injury. But either one of those things I think are probably a little bit more likely than a low ankle sprain, and both of those things are things that it often takes players at least a week to come back from. So it will not surprise me at all if Reggie Bush is not practicing on Friday and doesn't play this weekend. Again, just like Carson Palmer, a little bit too early in the week to rule him out, but especially with Joique Bell looking very likely to return from his concussion, if Reggie Bush isn't ready to come back this week, I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense to risk an aggravation to Bush and an aggravation to Calvin Johnson. Both of those guys may rest so that hopefully they'll get them back and not have something linger on and on and on like it already has started to do for Calvin Johnson.
Oh, Dr. Gene, did you have to let it linger? As we got one more lap here with Dr. Gene Bramwell going inside the injury report. I'd sing Zombie next, but don't want to wake those that may be sleeping. And we're going to talk about Brandon Marshall. You mentioned earlier in the program, Dr. Gene, about these athletes wanting to play and wanting to show the toughness and convincing the team that they should play. And the news report comes out today that Brandon Marshall's ankle, said the ankle injury he suffered in week 1, should have kept him out for around 4 weeks. But he battled through it and convinced the team to continue letting him play. And we know about the struggles and how he's been hot, he's been cold, and how fantasy owners have been a bit frustrated. In looking at Marshall or any of these players, Dr. Gene, is there something that you look for specifically throughout the week to determine, okay, this guy's trying to do too much, like we've seen with Calvin Johnson recently?
Yeah, if you don't practice all week long and then you're active on game day, that's a concern, especially if it's a new injury and it's not a chronic situation that we know has been nagging that particular player for a long time, maybe even years. So if Marcus Colston is on the injury report with a knee problem, or Julio Jones at this point is on the injury report with an ankle issue and isn't practicing much, but we've seen them play through those injuries and play effectively in the games, then I'm not that worried about him. Brandon Marshall at this point I think is okay. He's been through 2 weeks of full practice. He hasn't confirmed it, I don't believe, is a high ankle sprain yet, but that's what it sounds like. The aggravation that we saw on Sunday Night Football a couple of weeks ago was suspicious for that type of mechanism. It wasn't 100% certain, but it was certainly suspicious. And if you've got any skill position player, with the exception of maybe Percy Harvin a couple of years ago, who had a couple of ligament tears on the outside of his ankle, with an ankle injury that doesn't allow them to get back on the field and do what they would normally do after 2 or 3 weeks, you have to be concerned that it's a high ankle type injury. And again, not every one of those injuries, as I talked about on Twitter earlier this week, means 3 to 4 weeks at minimum, but it just takes a little bit longer for the same grade of a high ankle injury for a player to recover from those than a similar grade of a different injury there. What you'd watch for, you can watch during the games as well. What we saw from Brandon Marshall was that he looked like he could run in a straight line fine, but he had a lot of difficulty slowing down and then turning. And that's pretty typical of a high ankle type injury when you have to turn your foot to the outside and plant and pivot. That can be a concern. So the low ankle sprains and planting and turning away from the body can be as well. But what we saw from Brandon Marshall was kind of suspicious for that. I'm not too worried about him right now. I'm hoping that this is the week we finally see the Brandon Marshall of old. He has had 3 to 4 weeks to recover. He has been able to fully practice on consecutive days for a couple of weeks. So I don't have too many qualms about putting him in the lineup. I know his targets still weren't there last week despite a full week of practice, but I think we're getting closer to the point where Brandon Marshall gets his usual 8 to 12 targets and back to his usual production.
Speaking of back to his old self, Andre Johnson setting up a Arian Foster touchdown and Arian Foster setting up his own touchdown. So everyone can quit their moaning and groaning about bad games as the Texans have pulled back within a score. Confetti, woo! Gene, Cam Newton, got a question for you about Cam. Coming at this one a little different angle. We don't usually think of players getting healthier during the season. However, Cam Newton was coming into the season talking about his ankle, off-season ankle surgery, and how it was bothering him. And he's looking good as a passer. He's looking very good as a passer. Good velocity, good location on his balls. Not so much as a runner, or at least not very productive as a runner. But we also see that the Panthers' backfield has nothing. So could we expect that maybe as Newton becomes more accustomed to playing on the ankle, or this could be like some scar tissue and some things that break loose, is there any reason to have optimism that he could feel better and more willing to run on that ankle as the season goes on?
Well, I think as long as he's got good location on his balls, there's reason for optimism for him for sure, as you would say. But no, I don't think that ankle is not likely to get any better. It's going to take more than just a bye week off, whenever that is for Carolina. I think it's coming up relatively soon. It's going to take more than a bye week off for that ankle to fully heal. So it's something he's going to struggle with for the rest of the year. He's already said there's some soreness. There's been a couple of indications a month apart in talking to the media where he's let some comments out where he's trying to tell us that he doesn't feel right, but he's going to play through it for whatever reason that is. I don't feel like he's making excuses for his play necessarily, but he hasn't really been shy about saying, I don't feel fully comfortable with my ankle yet, and I expected to, but I don't. So there may be a point later in the season where he feels a little bit better, but the type of ankle injury he had, the type of ankle surgery that he has, that soreness there, it's because he's got some stiffness. It's probably because he's got some inflammation. It's nice that he's playing in a southern city, Charlotte, where he's probably not likely to have a lot of cold weather games, but that's going to be a little bit an issue for him as winter progresses. I think hopefully it will be enough that he continue to look good in the pocket and be accurate and be a little bit more accurate downfield than he was earlier in the season. But I don't think we're going to see the running Cam Newton of old anytime this year.
Well, going from Cam Newton's ball location, let's go ahead and focus on Zach Stacy and Marshawn Lynch as a twofer of running backs. Stacy has a calf injury, didn't practice today. And then I want you to talk about if you saw the Monday night game where Lynch missed the first series or first couple of series, and they were all freaking out up in the broadcast booth about where he was, and I thought Mike Tirico was going to send out an all-points bulletin and maybe start putting his name on milk bottles and maybe shedding a tear or two on camera to the local news affiliate. Lynch was actually on the bike and he was pedaling, and it looked like they were stuffing a heating pad on his backside. Can you talk a little bit about what the possibilities were there with that, as well as Zach Stacy's calf?
Yeah, let's see what Zach Stacy does tomorrow and then into Friday into Saturday. And I think Saturday morning is really going to tell the tale on Stacy. If he's back to any kind of practice, I think we can expect him to play. And again, how much he rotates with Benny Cunningham is going to be an open question that we may be talking about next week. Marshawn Lynch, this is something we've seen with Lynch off and on for a number of years now. He's got an area in his back that gets irritated in spasms, and it's something that he's not too comfortable playing through until he can get it warmed up. And there have been some situations where it's balked on him, it's tightened up on him in pregame warm-ups, and he's not been able to get it loosened up. So they probably ran him back in the locker room, did a little bit of treatment, some stimulation, got him back on the bike, and he felt well enough, and it didn't limit him at all. But this is, if you've owned Marshawn Lynch on a fantasy team in the past, you know this is something that you may have to deal with. It's not a reason to keep him out of lineups, but there may be a game a year where you'll lose a series or two in the beginning, and hopefully not more than that, to these back spasms. He's going to be listed on the injury report off and on with them, but he's been tough enough that I think there isn't anything, it doesn't appear to be anything structural. We've not heard, despite all of these episodes of back problems that he's had, that it's definitely due to a herniated disc or some sort of degenerative condition where these back spasms are going to be more likely in the coming weeks than they have been in the past. So I don't believe I saw Marshawn Lynch on the injury report this week. That's a good sign. He made it through and came out of halftime without any trouble last week. So I expect this not to be too much of an issue going forward.
He is Dr. Gene Bramall. You can follow him on Twitter at Gene Bramall and check out Bramall's injury report and taking you inside the injury report at footballguys.com. All the work that you do, much appreciated by all, Dr. Gene, as always. One final question before we let you out of here, man. What's on the shelf behind you? Is that a picture or an
action figure?
It's action figures, right?
Which one here?
The one of the
no, that's
the one over your left shoulder.
That's not one of my doctor ones. That's just a father and son thing that my son got me for Father's Day. I've got a couple of little doctor things around here, but that's a boy with
Dr. Nick
right next to him.
Dr. Nick Riviera.
I wish I had that impression in my bag. I don't really have that impression.
My wife has Lionel Hutz in her office. I got her Lionel Hutz.
Yeah.
So.
There you go. He's
Riviera
Dr.
would be
Gene.
good. We might have to find him around here somewhere.
He makes it happen. He's Dr. Gene Bramall. Dr. Gene, appreciate it, man. Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Have a good week.
All right. We'll see him around. That is Dr. Gene Bramall. Bloom, you gave us a mini update here. It is the Audible Live each and every Thursday night. Give us a full update of what's going on in this Colts-Texans game, getting closer.
Well, I have to admit that I'm just watching the NFL.com, so I'm not actually getting to see the plays. In interest of full disclosure, but the Colts are driving now, and again, Andrew Luck is basically doing whatever he wants against the Texans defense, and Trent Richardson's doing what he wants, which is average about 2.5 yards a carry. But we got T.Y. Hilton and Dwayne Allen catching passes as they're matriculating down the field on second down and 7 right now on the and there goes T.Y. Hilton in for the touchdown. And this is assuming NFL.com sometimes will be unreliable, so.
Yeah, it could be like a 5-yard loss.
Right. But if it is a touchdown, we now have T.Y. Hilton over 200 yards, and the touchdown hadn't scored. I think they were saying, I don't remember the exact number of games, but he had caught something like 70, 80, 90 passes, 70, high 70s since his last touchdown. But that drought is over. It looked like he had one earlier, but was touched down inside the 5. So a massive night for Luck, a massive night for Hilton. And I think that one of the things we take out of this is probably, especially because it was a road game, a stiffer test for Luck. Now we can say maybe the Texans defense didn't have that much of their edge because it's Thursday. We can make excuses, but it is looking at this point, even with Baltimore somewhat stifling him last week, he was still about a 25-point play in most fantasy leagues. You were wondering, he's played Jacksonville, he played Philly, he played Tennessee. Is it just the teams he played? But we're watching this one and saying, no, it's not the teams he played. Right now, I think there's a legitimate debate between Andrew Luck and Peyton Manning, although after Peyton Manning throws for 700 yards against the Jets, maybe not.
Yeah, after he gets that record. He only needs 6. That one looks like a touchdown. Bill O'Brien certainly upset with himself, but Hilton with a big play there. 207 and a touch right now. If it stands, looks like it's going to stand. And are the Colts going to go for 2 now? Yeah, that's what it looks like
38
there.
fantasy points for one league, I know.
Yeah, there you go.
That's
awesome,
pretty nice.
T.Y. Hilton. By the way, Kendall Wright looks at that touchdown drought, and he's like, damn. All right, so let's make it happen. We'll keep you up to date as to what's going on in that game, and also taking around the National Football League and talk about some of the latest news from around the NFL and kind of some feelings on these players. By the way, Luck got hammered on that touchdown throw, so showing that toughness, just like Phillip Rivers. Now, Rivers, of course, going up against Oakland this week. You love that, and you love exactly what he's been doing here. Bloom, we saw this last year, a version of this last year. We saw Rivers off to the hot start. We saw this team transition to more of a ground game, that boa constrictor, as you call it, Bloom, in the second half of the season, and certainly in the fantasy playoffs, those assets that you had in San Diego's team, certainly like an Eddie Royal, et cetera, weren't as solid as they were earlier in the year. Is there a little concern, that little tapping in the back of your brain, Bloom, that maybe this year, San Diego, hot start again, Rivers hot, everything pass. Is there that feeling that maybe as the leaves change and as the snow falls, not in San Diego, but this team will go to more of a running game, especially when Matthews comes back?
Certainly possible, but I think that you are comfortable. You can sleep well knowing that, hey, if Rivers only has 250 and a touchdown in some games because they're able to totally control the game, then you can live with that. But the nice thing is, if we're looking ahead to the fantasy playoffs, we have a game at home against New England, a game at home against Denver, and a game at San Francisco. So, sure, you may see them do the game shortening against these two teams, against New England and Denver, and go ahead and give him less opportunity. But I think that you can live with that, because if that's the case, then the team is humming, and you also have this year, I think, a more seasoned Ladarius Green. You have a healthier Eddie Royal. You have Malcolm Floyd, who you didn't have last year. So I think all these things give Rivers the chance to keep this momentum going. And if he's your quarterback, I think you're perfectly fine riding him into the sunset, and you're not worried about it.
Perfectly fine riding Phillip Rivers into the sunset. Matt, your thoughts on this Chargers situation?
I agree with Bloom, because looking at Malcolm Floyd and the way that he's played, that has really been a big difference. It's funny, I think I said something during a mock draft we did on the air about who they have, Malcolm Floyd, and I think I look at that now and I think, maybe I spent a lot of time on Monday nights watching Malcolm Floyd from a half asleep kind of stupor and not really seeing his game, because it has really made a big difference for them because of the fact that they don't have Vincent Jackson, and that he can throw it up and give Floyd a chance to win the ball in the air, which he's done enough to be able to, stretch this opposing defenses out. And I think that as a result of that, I would feel good about Rivers in this scenario, because of the fact that Allen should probably get healthy enough to go. Royals doing his part. And then you also have the fact that this team is going to probably have, he's got a healthy Gates. Green will probably get into the act at least a little bit. So there's enough to spread this team around, and there's one more year of experience among all of these receivers that I think it'll keep it steady.
Well, and we see the pressure that Rivers is under. Usually when we talk about relief valve receivers, we're talking about tight ends, wheel route, screen pass, shorter routes. Malcolm Floyd is a relief valve receiver that goes deep. And when Rivers is under pressure and getting hammered as he throws, he tosses it up to the big man and lets him go get it. From San Diego to Seattle, Matt, this one I'm going to start with you with Russell Wilson. His ceiling continues to grow. We've got Percy Harvin with a little thigh thing. We didn't get to ask Dr. Jean about that, as that just comes across the wire. Added to the injury report on Thursday, missing practice with a thigh issue. So Harvin banged up. Certainly that impacts what this team does. I mentioned Luke Wilson as a what the heck flex this week. I'm interested to see what he can do this week for Seattle. But Russell Wilson, as that ceiling continues to grow, what kind of acceleration are you looking for from this young quarterback who, I said it in the preview shows, Matt, the thing that takes this game down is bad quarterback play. Okay, ratings are up. All this controversy, all these troubles, suspensions, ratings are up in the National Football League. What turns people away is when the quarterbacks suck. And it makes me feel good that there's caretakers like Andrew Luck and like Russell Wilson, that next generation, that this game's going to be more than fine with that quarterback play. What kind of pace are we expecting here for Wilson?
Actually, a slower pace than what we're seeing fantasy point-wise right now from last week. I think that honestly, I think that he's on track at this stage. I think there are some folks who are expecting Wilson to turn into Drew Brees by season's end or to be a highly productive passing quarterback. But I think this offense is trending towards opening up, but it's not going to be there for the next 2 to 3 years. I really think it depends on how soon Marshawn Lynch goes, into the sunset, and then how fast a guy like Paul Richardson develops, and whether or not Percy Harvin can stay healthy enough for them to have a 1-2 punch at receiver the way that Matt Ryan has a 1-2 punch at receiver, or the way that Drew Brees for a while had a 1-2 punch with Jimmy Graham and Colston. And I think that that's really what they're seeking at this stage. Right now, Wilson makes the right reads. He's an unbelievably good improviser. He has excellent field awareness, and he can buy time. So, it's kind of like having a more nimble Ben Roethlisberger with a little bit more brains when it comes to throwing the ball downfield, not into tight coverage. Less bravado, a little more brains in that respect. And it's not an insult to Roethlisberger, really. It's really more of a compliment to Wilson's high-end game and the way that he's played. So if you're a fantasy owner, I wouldn't be expecting him to be a top 5 quarterback this year. I think that maybe 2 years from now, we might be looking back and seeing that progression to where he ends up threatening to be at that tier as a passer. Because he exhibits those qualities, but this offense really isn't set up for that. It's set up for play action. It's set up for really, quick decision making across the middle. Occasionally they'll throw a deeper play, a deeper pass off of the play action, but there's they rely on his wheels, his judiciousness on being able to scramble and get first downs and be able to break the pocket and make some quick plays happen.
Bloom, to you, Russell Wilson, a good matchup this week, certainly at home. A lot of fantasy owners excited about he could be a top 5 quarterback this week in rankings and projections. What about this Harvin thing? Again, kind of later breaking here, the Harvin, a late addition to the injury report on Thursday. If we're talking about Russell Wilson with a less than 100% Harvin, or worst case scenario, no Harvin, how does that impact your fantasy rankings and projections for Wilson this week?
I might move him down to the bottom of the tier I have him in, which is in the elite tier because of the matchup, because he's at home. However, I'm not that worried about it. I'm also not worried about Harvin depending on what he does tomorrow, because I think it's perfectly reasonable to explain this as they're giving him a day of rest in the middle of the week. If we see him come back to full practice tomorrow, if we don't see him practice tomorrow, then we may have to sweat it out until game time. But just going back really quickly to the larger question of Russell Wilson this year for fantasy football, what I find interesting is he's still basically taking what the defense is giving him. He's not getting greedy out there, and he's not necessarily forcing the issue. The problem is that the Seahawks are just too good. They're just too good of a team. They're too good at running the ball. They're too good on defense. They don't need him to put the team on his shoulders, like, for instance, Andrew Luck tonight. And if you switch the teams, if you put Andrew Luck on Seattle and you put Russell Wilson on Indy, then Russell Wilson would be the one we're talking about competing with Peyton Manning for fantasy production this year. And Andrew Luck would be the guy we'd be saying, well, when is he going to really arrive for fantasy football? So I think that's another thing holding Russell Wilson back. It's certainly not anything of his doing right now.
It is the Audible Live here on youtube.com/footballguys, DOTCOM. Check us out on iTunes as well, Stitcher Radio. We appreciate each and every one of you. It's very humbling. Bloom, you and I talked about this after the show today. I had a guy call from London last night to ask a fantasy question. It was like 3 in the morning. So everyone across the planet, we love you. Thank you very much for participating and listening and jumping on board, Twitter, etc., etc. Have to tell you about FanDuel.com because they're revolutionizing fantasy football. You love your local league, but maybe you drafted some guys that got hurt, suspended, or basic slappies. Well, don't have to worry about that. No season-long commitment, no upfront fees. Go to FanDuel.com, check it out, set a new lineup each week, and play each week or whenever you want. It's up to you. FanDuel.com giving away over $10 million weekly in fantasy football prizes. Make sure you check them out, FanDuel.com. Sign up today. Ben Tate with the finger. Practice in full for the second straight day. There's a hot hand approach. Bloom, here's where we get to talk about our beloved Steelers. A hot hand approach to the running back position in fantasy. Ben Tate was a monster last week. This week, some fantasy owners are a little bit cooler. So, whoa, look at Pittsburgh. Look what they've done the last couple of weeks. And, I've got Ben Tate, but I'm not excited about the matchup. Steelers D ranked 11th in the NFL this year, giving up 101.8 yards per game. They held Jacksonville to 15 for 56 on the ground. Limited the Buccaneers to 16 for 63 and a touch on the ground 2 weeks ago. Pittsburgh's run defense is playing well, but again, Jacksonville and Tampa. Now what about this Cleveland team? And as we've always said, Kyle Shanahan's going to run the rock. Ben Tate, where do you like him this week and projections-wise, Bloom? And are you riding that hot hand saying, hell yeah, I'm putting Tate back in?
Well, sure, he's a strong running back too. You're silly if you put him on the bench. I mean, the one risk would be that he get hurt during the game. And it's 5 games in. Season-long stats are still not reliable and not worth citing yet. You cited Jacksonville and Tampa, and let's tack on there Carolina, who ran for 35 yards on 8 carries against the Steelers. Running backs did. So if we go back to Baltimore in week 2, remember we saw Baltimore break the Steelers back and bust off some long runs. The running backs there had 152 yards rushing, and then Cleveland, which is obviously relevant, Steelers jumped ahead 27-3 in that game. Horrible game script for the running game. The 3 running backs, West, Tate, and Crowell, still combined for 173 yards on 27 carries. So I am not seeing the Steelers as a bad matchup at all. I'm seeing the Steelers as a very good matchup for Ben Tate. And again, unless he leaves the game early with an injury, he's going to get fed the ball. He's going to get 20 carries. Even if the Steelers score touchdowns on their first 4 drives, they're going to stick with it because they have shown you can come back with the running game on the Pittsburgh Steelers, including the other game, Tennessee last week. So all of these things tell me that Ben Tate is actually, with the exception of the risk of re-injury, which in some cases the risk of injury, in every case it goes with every running back every week. Tate is obviously higher, but otherwise he's good to go.
Cleveland doesn't have the luxury to be one-dimensional. That's the bottom line. They don't have the ability to have that quarterback that says, hey, let me do it all. And the fact that they can run the rock extremely well, regardless, a talented trio of running backs in Cleveland. How long the Ben Tate hype train, Matt, could last in your eyes? Again, we're all worried about injuries with Ben Tate, but how confident are you in him going forward in this offense especially?
He's going to make like Pluto here. He's back. I think that's basically what's going to happen here. He's going to be saying this to the Pittsburgh Steelers this weekend. You really have to look at Tate and understand that the Cleveland Browns also played pretty good football against the Ravens. They were able to run the ball against them. I think that this is a team that can really run the ball on almost anyone, and And I think that Tate is a big reason of that. Tate is not quite as natural of a runner as Isaiah Crowell, but he is a much more experienced and physical runner than Terrence West, in my opinion. He's a good blend of both players, and he has the experience on both of them. So the way I look at it is that after watching last week's game, I think that Crowell would have earned more carries in the fourth quarter, except for the fact that there was an interception thrown in the fourth quarter that was called back due to a defensive penalty. But during that interception return, Crowell was on the field, and he ran back. He covered about 60 to 70 yards worth of space to knock the defender out of bounds at the 1. I mean, it was like a great effort play, the type of effort play that everyone said he wasn't going to display pre-draft or feared that he wasn't going to display. So he's showing people who have worried about his off-field concerns and his on-field concerns of maybe being the prima donna 5-star recruit, that he's come to earn his check this year. So I think that took him out of a whole series worth of plays for much of that series that he was in for, because they rested him after he basically prevented a touchdown. And so I think you're going to see more of a rotation down the line where you're going to see Crowell and Tate kind of trade off carries, but for the majority of the looks, it's probably going to be the Brandon Tate show unless he gets hurt. And again, you don't count on that. I think that he's a very good player that you should be shopping for if you need a running back, if you can get him and Crowell. And that was something that Bloom and I talked about on the couch this week, is that if you can get those two guys either in a package deal or trade for one and add the other off the waiver wire, you've got two of the three best options in this running game.
And make it happen. Bloom, back to you quickly on the yearly stats thing. When do you – and again, we look at everything. Yeah. The people that just go based off, well, against the run. No. Look at everything, but when do you like or have a greater appreciation for the yearly stats?
Well, I'll say this. If I am personally going to cite any of these stats, at least until we're getting to like week 12 or week 13, but even in that case, you know what? I'll say it categorically. If you are going to cite as an analyst, I think as somebody doing some armchair now, well, we're all doing armchair analysis. If you're just analyzing stuff, you're breaking down your decisions in your lineup and you're looking up stats. You don't have to be thorough. But if you're an analyst, a quote-unquote expert like we are, and you're citing year-to-date ranks against the run and the pass and things like that, first of all, so now you're going to get me up on the soapbox here.
Do it.
First of all, you need to understand what the metric is based on, because sometimes if you look at the ranks, a team can have given up the 28th least rushing yards, but still be giving up 4.5 yards a carry and still have some problems defending the run. Likewise, a team can have a quote-unquote great pass defense because everyone can run on them, and they don't bother to pass that much, or vice versa. You also have to look at things like trailing indicators, the last 5 games. You have players that are hurt who are not currently in the defense, or you have players who were hurt when they were facing teams. You have a case like Kansas City last year where they were facing second and third string quarterbacks every week. So as an analyst, if you're citing it as a reason to play or not play somebody, it has to have context. You have to dig and see, because that one data point in one stat, usually yards allowed, is just, it's such a narrow way to rate defenses. People like to refer to that stuff shorthand, and I do think for conversation fodder, it's fine to just toss that stuff around. However, if you're talking about play or don't play this player because of that stat, then you have to be sure that it's not a counterfeit stat, or that it's a stat that doesn't represent the actual state of the unit right now.
Well, and it is a Broncos show. Perfect example. The Broncos are 7th against the run, 88.3 yards allowed per game. Are they really that good against the run? No. You get down to Peyton Manning, you got to pass all day. So that's why they're blitzkrieg through the air, and teams abandon the run. Those teams, unlike Cleveland, who when they get down, they just keep running, keep doing what they're doing, and it works for them. So go beyond just the numbers. Matt, your thoughts here?
I agree with you guys in terms of what was going on. I was actually looking at NFL.com and seeing J.J. Watt recover an Andrew Luck fumble and take it to the house. So that's
I just want to take a moment to say this because I think you start. And by the way, Matt, you wrote a tremendous article on the role of emotion in football and football analysis or criticism, as you pointed out. Some good linguistics lessons in there too. But there's nobody closer. We are truly privileged to get to watch. I've not seen another player. I mean, it's funny because if you say, and I remember a year ago, I was running into some resistance where I said we might be watching the best defensive player in NFL history. We might be. And the thing is, he plays like a superhero. He plays like somebody that has pulled lightning bolts down from the heavens. And the last player I can think of that really stood out in that way is the player that some would say is the greatest defensive player in NFL history, Lawrence Taylor. So it is incredible that we're 6 weeks into the season, and it's almost becoming routine that he can single-handedly make these plays, even though every team is prepared. It's like the opposite of the shutting down the scorer in basketball. Everyone's saying this one guy can't hurt us. He still finds a way to do it.
There's no boxing one against J.J. Watt. There's a basketball reference for you, Bloom. And by the way,
good job, Cease.
I know.
I want to pat you on the head. Good job.
Well, I do have this, so
nice.
Ready to go. I'll say this: J.J. Watt's always reminded me of Reggie White. And speaking of pushback, yeah, when you bring that up, people are like, no, God, no. Yes, he can be like Reggie White. And you talk about the superhero in him. The Eagles have scored 7 of the 8 possible ways that you can score a touchdown. The only way that the Eagles have not scored, this is my human head weighs 8 pounds for you, Matt. The only way the Eagles have not scored is a blocked field goal return for a touchdown. There's 8 ways to score There's 8 ways to score a touchdown. J.J. Watt scored 9 ways. That's how good he is. Is he like the Chuck Norris, Matt?
Yeah, I think he is. He's Chuck Norris and Terry Tate office linebacker and Patrick Willis, and he's just incredible. And it is kind of funny about the Eagles because my big question is the one thing they haven't maybe done in addition to that is that they haven't done it the same way twice. They're going to need to start to find a way to start doing it the same way twice, or they might not start winning games. They might start losing some ball games that they need to win. But yeah, J.J. Watt is just incredible, and it's kind of funny because I was struck last week by Lance Zierlein, who doesn't normally do this, I think, but he posted a link of a local Texans beat writer who did this really shoddy kind of takedown piece of J.J. Watt on draft day, basically saying that the Texans should have picked Nick Fairley, and instead they picked a pizza delivery boy who doesn't know, who's just gets by on effort. And it was so very clear that this guy never watched J.J. Watt, and it was just kind of funny because Lance was like, I don't normally do this, but if you're going to write a takedown piece, at least show that you've watched some football before you do so. So it was kind of funny because they were just like, this is going to be the biggest mistake, and it's funny how draft day looks because a lot of people did love Nick Fairley, and folks who aren't in the know and who don't watch a lot of tape would look at J.J. Watt and say, oh, he gets by a little bit more on effort than he is this great athlete, and that's a big misconception that was out there about him. I remember, Rob Rang just talking about how strong his hands were. That he had some of the strongest mitts that you'd ever see. If he got his hands on you, you were going down. And credit to him for being, talking about him. I remember very early on as being a very fine player.
It's because Rob Rang's a stud. Speaking of studs or potential studs, kind of studly. Not the greatest transition. Is there a bigger role brewing for Storm Johnson, Bloom? We've talked about this before. Matt, I'll get your thoughts here in just a little bit, but we're hearing that, you got the Gerhardt injury, you got Denard Robinson there and Jordan Todman, but Storm Johnson, with his chemistry with Bortles, which is important when the pressure's on, quarterback's going to look to who he trusts, and we know that he does everything well, including pass protection, which is always important for a young rookie back. Is there a larger role? And what they've said is going to be a two-headed backfield. Is there at least part of that two-headed backfield for Storm Johnson brewing here as we get through the season?
Yeah, well, I'm actually very optimistic about Storm Johnson. I think that there's a few things at operation here. One is that Toby Gerhardt's either banged up or not getting it done. I have a feeling that internally the Jags have just kind of chalked up that acquisition. We know that Jordan Todman's limited. We know that Denard Robinson's limited. But what I like here, and this is something that we noticed on draft day, and it felt too easy to put a lot of stock in it. But now that you see the kind of game scripts that Jacksonville is going to be on weekly, the extensive experience between Blake Bortles and Storm Johnson could be tremendous. Even if the offensive line's on opening holes, even if the yards and production is not there in the typical flow of the offense, because the typical flow of the offense is stopped up. You need to plunge it and clean, it's not happening. When they get into garbage time, when they get into just try to get down the field and no huddle, I can see Storm Johnson having games like Fred Jackson kind of games, 6, 7, 8 receptions. And I love, and speaking of Fred Jackson, we were talking about him on the couch, and I mean, that's the way that he plays. So again, you think garbage time or you think coming back from big deficits, Storm Johnson's going to be all out. So I think this is a very exciting development. And like Brandon Oliver, after we did the waiver wire show, the more I thought about Storm Johnson, the more I thought I'm underrating him. I'm artificially in my mind limiting the possibilities, mainly because of Jacksonville's offense. But the reality is that it's been a morose offense, partially because of there's being no energy or spark in the running game or out of the backfield in general. Again, because what you saw at Central Florida, and Matt, I'm sure you can back some of this up, there was definitely some 2-on-2 basketball kind of stuff going on with Bortles and Storm Johnson at times in that short passing game. And I just think that it makes sense that when the bullets are flying, these guys, there's going to be that connection. It's going to come back. It's going to be very natural. So I'm excited.
Yeah, one of the...
Oh, go ahead, Matt.
Okay, I was going to say one of the better things that Johnson did at Central Florida was the short passing game, and he was very good at being able to work off of screens or short crossing routes and circle routes out of the backfield and gain yards. He's a type of back who has very good lateral agility, and he has that enough burst with that first step to be able to get a little bit of separation, and he's a high-effort player. So while I don't think he's a top-range athlete at the running back position, he's still a good enough running back to do a good job as a starter and certainly fit well within an offense. I think I compared him a little bit to the likes of Joique Bell in terms of his effort. And someone that can develop the type of smarts and savvy to become a good NFL running back. And having a quarterback that you've worked with before, I certainly think that can come into play, and especially with this offensive line that has struggled somewhat, and they were worried about to an extent that if you can get Blake Bortles to move around and he has a running back who's good at being able to slip behind the line and find that open space in the zone and communicate well with that type of rapport, you can see a lot more plays where Bortles maybe doesn't get sacked or has to throw the ball away, but actually delivers the ball to somebody who's going to gain 3, 5, 7 yards in chunks that can keep the offense on schedule. And if you do that, suddenly you might have more drives that are completed and more points on the board, and maybe wins will come out of some of that, or at least occasionally.
Well, what you want to see, Bloom brings up the basketball reference with the 2-on-2. It's really a give and go. And what you would want to see is when this team gets in any sort of 2-minute drill or hurry-up offense, that's the guy that he'll rely on. Now, you have the coaching staff maybe wanting to pump the brakes on your quarterback actually taking control and doing anything. Trust him. Trust Blake Bortles to run the show. And in a 2-minute offense, that's when a quarterback has the ability to take over more.
I just want to interject, and you hit it with 2-minute offense. I mean, you almost took the words out of my mouth. And I wanted to ask Matt if he has any observations on this. Because one interesting thing is, Andrew Luck, it's funny because with Bortles, you always hear Andrew Luck mentioned, you always hear Ben Roethlisberger mentioned. And I think that how Roethlisberger at times has flourished in the no huddle speaks to what Cease was just saying about the 2-minute drill, and that's when the quarterback gets to take over. But from watching Jacksonville this year, I get the feeling it's like watching Nick Foles playing for Philly or Austin Davis playing for St. Louis right now, where you feel like that Bortles has been given that first game against San Diego. It felt like they were keeping him in a more of a narrow range of plays, but last week I saw a little bit more, and I get the feeling that they are going to let him play, and they're not going to overly manage what he's exposed to out there. But Matt, I'm curious what you think, if you've gotten to see these games and you see that trend, or if I'm imagining it.
No, I think that you're seeing it, and I think that Blake Bortles does remind me of a mix of, say, Ben Roethlisberger, and if he becomes a savvy player and develops along the right trajectory, kind of a mix of Ben Roethlisberger and Matt Hasselbeck, which could be a really great combination when you're talking about somebody who has some level of restraint and also someone who can play under the fire the way that Bortles does. To me, that combination, what that spells the most is a good version of Jake Locker. And I'm not a Jake Locker fan, and I think that that's something where you look at him, and I think that what you see is what you get, which is a player who has great athleticism, very likable, and is going to consistently get hurt because he does not make quarterback-like decisions when the bullets are flying around him. I think Blake Bortles showed at Central Florida the ability to play with a good combination of smarts and toughness with the bullets flying around. Not maybe at the upper level reaches of a Russell Wilson or Andrew Luck, but high enough at that level that he's going to help make plays for a team. And really, I see him as a promising young quarterback who can provide you low-end quarterback one production in fantasy football within the next 3 to 4 years.
Exciting times to watch, certainly for dynasty owners, and we'll have some redraft value as well with Storm Johnson. Go back if you can and try to get a hold of that Louisville game. Not the Baylor game. Baylor doesn't play defense, but the Louisville game really accentuates everything that Storm Johnson can do, an all-purpose back who's good at everything and can earn the trust of his quarterback. Speaking of quarterback, as we move on in the Audible Live, we'll keep you up to date on what's going on in this game. Bill O'Brien feverishly walking the sidelines, so we'll check in that game in just a little bit. But Teddy Bridgewater back. Matt, let's start this one with you. What are your expectations for Teddy Bridgewater? Also, in listening to Norv Turner talk about Teddy Bridgewater and knowing that he was, I'm going to speak for all of us. If I'm wrong, correct me. All of our favorite quarterbacks, because he's smart and accurate. That's what he is. He does not respond poorly under duress, and he's always looking to be aggressive and go downfield. That's one of the things I've always appreciated about Teddy Bridgewater. Speaking of Louisville, Turner talked about when they drafted in the second round Drew Brees, and Turner was with San Diego as their offensive coordinator, and he was touching on the similarities between the two. You've got a smart and accurate quarterback. Now, it's not the Falcons that he's facing this week, Matt. But what are your thoughts now that Bridgewater's back from the ankle injury? Of course, missed the debacle that we had last Thursday night, but now back in action with Teddy Bridgewater. What are your expectations in start 2?
I think they're pretty much what they were in start 1, which is less than what he did against Atlanta last week or 2 weeks ago. I'm looking again at somewhere around the 250 to 270 yard range, looking at a couple touchdowns and an interception, either one touchdown rushing or a couple touchdowns throwing, depending on, it doesn't really matter how it's split out. What I'm expecting to see on the field beyond the box score, as how that translates, is someone who's making quick decisions, buying time in the pocket, scrambling when he needs to, breaking a longer run and sliding when he needs to, and being able to stand tough in the pocket and deliver an open ball to a receiver as necessary. But what you're also going to see is maybe some defenses thrown at him that he's not quite familiar with yet, and maybe he'll make a mistake here and there. Maybe some pressure might get to him where he ends up getting hit and fumbling a ball, something of that nature. That's the type of rookie mistake that's capable of happening. And but all in all, I would say a better game than uneven. It would be, I would say, another positive step in the right direction. For a player that Norv Turner said should have been drafted as one of the top 10 picks in this draft class.
Should have been a lot higher. Now, going up against Detroit, and they're ferocious, and they love to get in your head yet, Sigmund. What are you expecting from Bridgewater, and how does he handle the mental side of facing a defense that can be so ferocious?
I'm honestly not worried. I think that watching last week and how Kyle Orton, as he got more comfortable, found places to test the defense downfield successfully, was finding receivers open, especially Sammy Watkins in the short and intermediate zone. And like Matt said, quick decisions. Scan the field, see it clearly, get the ball out to an open receiver. I think Teddy Bridgewater can do that. I think he can do that with the array of weapons that he has. And I think that Detroit is not the same team without Calvin Johnson. I think you see it in Matthew Stafford. I think it has a cascade effect on the whole team as they lack a little bit of edge. Last week they did jump ahead 14-0 and then let their foot off the gas and never really got that edge back. So this game's going to be in Minnesota. I think the Minnesota crowd is very excited for Teddy and everything that Teddy brings with him. This is a wide-open division. I actually have Teddy Bridgewater. Let me look and see my exact number. He's my number 12 quarterback this week. So unless you have somebody, basically, I'll put it this way, unless you have somebody that is obviously someone to play against Teddy Bridgewater, I would probably rank him as your top quarterback.
And there you have it. It is the Audible Live each and every Thursday night, youtube.com/footballguys.com, DOTCOM on that last one. We're brought to you by footballguys.com and by fanduel.com as well. A couple of more here before we call it a night. And couldn't get through this Thursday show without talking about the Broncos' new starter. Yes, you heard it right. Troy Rank was the one who broke it. And it's something that we'd all anticipated, and the fact that Ronnie Hillman's going to get the start for the Denver Broncos in the game coming up against the New York Jets. Now we're going to toss this one around the ever-popular goat skin flask at an ELO concert. Ronnie Hillman in, and as the starter with John Fox, you never know exactly what to expect. I'll say this. The Broncos' offensive line has struggled to open holes consistently, and when I look back on smaller backs who have been successful as starters in the NFL. Warwick Dunn, he was very capable inside. In addition to being quick and fast, especially early on, he would lower his shoulder and he would grind in between the tackles. And talking to Jerome Bettis about fast Willie Parker. What do we remember about Willie Parker? Remember the speed, obviously, but we also remember that he could make people miss. He wasn't as rigid as we see with Ronnie Hillman now. And I made this comparison today. Matt, I'll toss it to you first. I made the comparison in talking about one of my favorite backs of all time, Marshall Faulk. And there was a year that Mike Martz, in his infinite wisdom, said, let's go get Trung Candidate. Trung Candidate at Arizona was the type of back that was incredibly fast, 4.2, blazing speed. And Hillman might be the fastest Bronco, him or Bubba. But when you have to take 5 or 6 steps to throttle down and change direction, it means you're not elusive. And Candidate washed out immediately. Who was the North Dakota guy that lasted longer than
Lamar Gordon?
There you go, Lamar Gordon. We remember that. So in a similar vein, Hillman gets the start, but he needs big holes to have success. He had a couple in the game against the Cardinals, but can you honestly rely on that for the entire game? I put the over-under today on my show at 50 yards for Ronnie Hillman, and I'm taking the under. Because when I look at this game, and I look at the Jets' front seven, this team has already made the decision in the bye week, like, F balance. I almost dropped an F-bomb. Sorry, Joe, for even thinking about that. They've forgotten balance. They're going to go back to the air. And, yes, that'll have a positive effect on the ground game. But when I look at a back that is fast but not physical, doesn't push the pile, and a back that doesn't make people miss, that's why I'm excited to see what C.J. Anderson can do. Juwan Thompson has a left knee thing. He's going to dress, but I doubt he would get on the field much as a ball carrier. I texted C.J. the other day, and I said, dude, you should be the starter. Keep grinding. And he texted me back and said, thank you, sir. And then I felt old because he called me sir. Matt, your thought on this Broncos backfield, your thoughts on Hillman being the starter, the Trung Candidate comparison, and why, if you're a smaller back, you better be elusive, because being fast only gets you so much when the holes are there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if he continues to play like he has, and I think the Trung Candidate comparison makes a lot of sense. From maybe a larger perspective, one of the things that I think about with Hillman is that he's maybe a little, he's drinking that goatskin flask over there. Yeah, so, there we go. a broader perspective, it could also be that Ronnie Hillman is a little bit immature as a player, and that he had, the early issues, not being able to stay on the field and develop, and he was a young player coming out. So when you are a young player coming out, sometimes you don't know your game the way it needs to be and develop it in the way that it does, because and maybe he's capable of a little bit more, maybe being capable of being a little bit more agile and changing direction and making better decisions. But when you've basically fumbled that opportunity away and have had some issues maybe in the locker room or on the practice field, I don't know, but whatever issues he's had that's kept him out of the lineup in addition to his fumbling may have slowed his development, made him an unsure player, made him a player who's regressed a little bit in terms of his development as a running back. So there's that possibility there, and if he does show some of the things that you're describing, Cecil, that he hasn't so far, that would, to me, that would be what I'd attribute it to, is some maturity, and just coming into his own and knowing who he is as a running back. I think C.J. Anderson knows who he is as a running back. I think he's long known that. And he shows that on the field a little bit more. He integrates his skills a little bit better than, a lot better than what I've seen from Hillman thus far in the pros. And really, what I expect is that, this team is giving Hillman his first shot, because I guess they, from what you hear, it sounds like he's performed it the way that they've wanted him to, that he was going to be the starter, or he was going to be the second string player at the beginning of the season if he wasn't banged up a little bit. So he's going to get his shot. But to me, Tiki Barber was a player who took a while to develop. He had flashes of goodness, but he also had his own issues fumbling the ball. He also had to become a little bit more of a physical player. And I look at the situation, and if I'm picking up a player or a back and betting on this long term, even in redraft, being the short term idea of what a long term issue is, it would be C.J. Anderson is the guy that I'm counting on.
Well, there's a real opportunity here for fantasy owners. Bloom, you and I have talked about Brandon Oliver coming in, and even when Matthews is back, Oliver's got a role. He's carved out a role for himself as the Danny Woodhead replacement, essentially. There's an opportunity for somebody here, and we could see Monte Ball come back to a job that's not his anymore. We could see Monte Ball come back and be a goal line back or something, based on if someone, player X, steps up. And by the way, Hillman's not falling asleep in meetings anymore, not in practice. But he's not falling asleep in meetings anymore. We do worry about the illness, quote unquote, from the Dallas preseason game. But now we know he's the starter. Bloom, your thoughts?
This reminds me of so many situations over the years, and I'm trying not to oversell this, but we know who Hillman is. And I agree with Matt's point in general that we can see players develop, but we still saw enough of Hillman early on in his career to see his career trajectory. So some things start to click, who's he going to be? And we've seen him with opportunities literally fumble them away. And otherwise, we have also seen C.J. Anderson look pretty good on the field this year. So my general stance on this backfield is there will either be nobody worth starting week to week, or it'll be C.J. Anderson. If there is going to be a hit, it will be C.J. Anderson. I do not know if there will be a hit. I will say this, though. Hopefully this Monty Ball injury breaks the trance of the Broncos organization about Monty Ball. Because I think that if you didn't know he was a second-round pick, and you didn't know, and I mean, how many times have we had on record these aspirational statements about we think Monty Ball this, we think Monty Ball that? And again, I'm really starting to wonder, the more we hear that about a guy, that it's a team trying to pump up his confidence in the media, and they're worried about him, and it's actually a negative indicator. In other words, if a team is overselling someone to us in the media, I mean, it's a working theory. I'm not saying it's necessarily the case with Monty Ball, but if you didn't know anything about Monty Ball and you just watched these running backs play this year, and I'm even comparing Ball to Hillman, Ball, you would say, why are they giving that guy the ball so much and not those other guys? They all look roughly equal, if not anything. He's the third most effective of the three. So when he comes back from the injury, as you said, Cease, hopefully they've reassessed things, because I think that he's been limiting what the offense can do. And that should change, this is going to be like the Doug Martin situation last year when people were going to watch Hillman and Anderson and say, oh, they can run the ball. It's not just the offensive line or whatever excuse you want to make for Monty Ball today.
We shall see what happens with the Denver Broncos coming up in Week 6 and how this thing shakes out. Matt, quickly, because I know there's a lot of people wondering about Juwan Thompson. You've heard me rattle on and on about him. He's a guy, just a guy, in my opinion. At best case scenario, a Jason Snelling. You remember him from Duke, great in pass protection. He's probably the best pass protector out there. And now he's got a left knee injury. Not his first one, by the way. Had a little minor knee thing in training camp as well. So your thoughts here on Juwan Thompson, because I know we've gotten a lot of questions about, well, yeah, CJ, yeah, Ronnie, yeah, but what about Juwan?
That was my comp too this week. Was actually, I mentioned that on the air too, was Jason Snelling, a poor man's Jason Snelling, to be honest. And I think that he's a guy that can get the job done if you ask him to do that. But he's not a dynamic back. He has some power and size. He can pass protect. He can do the job. And people always love the underdog back who can do the job, or the underdog, or that second baseman in baseball who fields the ball well but might not be a great hitter but is scrappy. And I think that he's kind of that scrappy player. I mean, that's what you get, kind of what you see is what you get. And if the Broncos have to rely on him, then that means that C.J. Anderson probably got hurt or completely failed in his opportunity to earn more carries. And Ronnie Hillman did what Ronnie Hillman has done for the past couple of years.
It is the Audible Live each and every Thursday night. Bloom, we've got this game winding down with about 3 minutes left in the fourth quarter. Colts have the ball. What a game update here before we call it a night.
Sure, the Texans had a chance. Fitzpatrick was moving them, but an Andre Johnson fumble kept it made it a screeching halt. So right now, the Texans are going to use up their timeouts along with the 2-minute warning. Hopefully, at the worst, force a field goal or maybe missed field goal and get the ball back either with 8 to tie or a touchdown to win. We'll get one more chance to see if there's any Fitz magic in Houston tonight.
Do you know what's the most impressive thing about J.J. Watt in this game?
What's that?
It's that he didn't get tangled up in Fitzpatrick's beard. The fact that he could actually avoid the beard and not get tangled up in there is pretty amazing.
Lance Zierlein during that last drive on Twitter said, the Texans can't lose. They have a wildling leading them down the field. A wildling. No way they can lose.
There you go. And is Andrew Luck Jon Snow then, I guess?
Yeah, sure. No, he is. He definitely is.
Well, it's a Song of Fire and Ice, baby. It's all about Jon Snow and Khaleesi. Now I'm thinking about Khaleesi. Yeah, we're watching this game wrap up. The fantasy owners that started DeAndre Hopkins tonight, Matt, they're a little disappointed with 2 targets, 1 catch, 12 yards for Hopkins.
Yeah, well, it was bound to the pendulum was bound to swing back in Andre Johnson's favor at least at some point during the season. I wouldn't say, at this stage, you're going to see a little bit more balance probably with players, but I mean, I think that the Colts probably did look at Hopkins after the first 4 weeks, because generally scouting the scouting needle tends to shift and action gets put into place by teams after the first 4 weeks of scouting the season. And they probably, the Colts were probably got enough to look at enough film and said, oh yeah, this Hopkins guy's pretty good. Maybe we need to make him the priority. And now I think that's what's happened.
And open things up for the banged up Andre Johnson. Bloom, final thoughts as we tie a bow on tonight's show.
The final thoughts are, again, Andrew Luck showing that he has completely arrived on the scene. Also for fantasy, we've got gasoline on the fire as the defense is good but not great. The running game, you got Trent Richardson averaging 2.2 per carry tonight. But hey, even Ahmad Bradshaw's averaging 3, just a little over 3. So some credit there. Arian Foster still showing everyone that he can get it done with the best of them. Even Andre Johnson showing them that. But I think this was actually a pretty good showing for the Texans, honestly, in a showdown game, as the Colts are still, even though Peyton Manning's not there, the big brother that they're trying to overcome, and this should give them some confidence. I don't think the Ryan Mallett doomsday clock ticked forward at all.
Oh, man, watching J.J. Watt. Yeah, we'll see how this game finishes up. No moral victories, though, right, Bloom?
No, well, no moral victories in this one. But yeah, if Dallas can keep it close, then that one might possibly qualify as a moral victory.
Matt Waldman, where's Zook, man? What are your final thoughts tonight?
I don't know. He's hanging out over on the other desk, so he's doing his deal. And so you guys ought to stay tuned tomorrow. We're going to have the RSP Film Room with Cecil Lammy as our special guest, and we're going to watch a little Todd Gurley, who I think we put the hex on basically for folks. But that doesn't mean he's not going to be a good NFL player or get drafted high due to the fact of some of the same things that A.J. Green engaged in earlier in his career too. So. We'll watch some of that and a second player to be named later.
Yeah, we got a group of backs we could go down, that's for sure. And Nelson Spruce, coach's film, coming up as soon as I get it. Second best receiver in the country. So keep that in mind when you're thinking of wide receivers. You got Amari Cooper, 1, Nelson Spruce, 2, and without Paul Richardson, they're using him in even more ways than I thought they would. We're getting off track. That's what we do sometimes here on the Audible. Listen, we love each and every one of you out there for watching the show, for listening to the show, subscribing on iTunes, following us on Twitter. Thank you guys. This is great. This is so much fun in watching these games, following the NFL, and talking about it with you. So, for the great Sigmund Bloom, a fantastic Matt Waldman, let's not forget the stud of the night. He is Gene Bramall. He's a man of great passion. I'm Cecil Lammy saying thanks for watching and listening.
And neuroticism.
He's neurotic and erotic at the same time. He's Dr. Gene. I'm Cecil. Stay frosty.